Hello, and welcome to the fourth podcast episode from Voices for Inclusive Activity. We are a group of disabled co-researchers who all have lived experience and a vested interest in making sport and physical activity accessible for all. So we are facilitated by Bev Goodman, who is an occupational therapist and PhD student at the University of Essex in the UK. So for the past 4 years, we have been working together to explore more accessible and inclusive ways of evaluating disability sport and physical activity. My name is Vanessa, or Ness, and I'm joined by co-researchers Fiona and Tom and Bev. We also have another co-researcher who couldn't be here today, and her name is Karen. Now, if you haven't already, you may want to listen back to our previous 3 podcast episodes to learn more about who we are, what this podcast is about, what we have done, and how we have worked together. So all recordings are available as audio podcasts on our Podbean channel, as subtitled videos on our YouTube channel, and that also comes with a written transcript. You may notice that we now have upgraded and have a rather fantastic logo and snazzy background, courtesy of the excellent design skills of our very own Tom. So a huge thanks from all of us for providing that. So what are we going to be talking about in this episode? So we're going to be chatting about what we found out from our research and also what we plan to do with this information. So Bev, I'm going to hand over to you. Can you describe what happened to the data that we collected?
Yeah, thanks, Nessa. So this stage of data analysis can be more challenging time to maintain participation of co-researchers. So I also had a period away from maternity leave, so I'm grateful to co-researchers for staying involved in this project. We talked together about what this stage might involve and ways that co-researchers could be involved in making sense of the information that we'd gathered. We needed to find a solution that made the best use of their time. They were very busy, and their expertise as well. So I did a lot of the more time consuming tasks behind the scenes, like transcribing interviews, making sense of the data, using a type of analysis called reflexive thematic analysis. I also used a piece of software called NVivo, which some researchers use to help them organise the data and organise the process. So after each episode of data collection, we'd talk together about the interview, and co-researchers shared what they'd found most significant about what the interviewee had said. So I used these reflections to loosely guide the analysis, but I also looked for what seemed to answer our research questions in the data. And this led to the development of some themes under each research question. So I created some descriptions for each of these themes using the data, using the actual words within the data. And I shared these with co-researchers at an in-person analysis day. So on this day, we got together and co-researchers discussed what stood out for them from these themes. And this is what we're going to aim to do in this podcast. We won't have time to talk about every single theme that came out, but co-researchers will summarise what they thought to be the key ideas within each research question.
Thank you, Bev. So now we're going to look at what we actually found out. So our overall research question was, how can we find out what disabled people get out of sport and physical activities in a way that meets the needs of disabled people and funders? We had 3 sub-questions. The first was, what are the things about sport and physical activities that matter to disabled people? Why do disabled people take part or not take part? So what stood out to you from this question, Bev?
Yeah, so as I looked more closely at the data, it became obvious that a lot of people were talking about experiences of social belonging in relation to sport and physical activity. But they were also describing aspects of doing and being and becoming. So these 4 aspects of doing, being, becoming, and belonging, they're recognised in occupational therapy theory and occupational science as a way of thinking about how people take part in activities or occupations, as we call them. So I was hesitant to bring this idea to co-researchers and not wanting to impose any theory from my area of work, but it seemed to fit so well. And so I asked co-researchers whether they thought we should use it or whether we should bin it. And I'll just let them tell you what they thought. So Tom, would you like to start?
Yes, so thanks, Bev. As you mentioned, we had a discussion around this, and a lot of the discussion was around barriers to disabled people being physically active. So whether that be accessibility requirements, but also often things like confidence and poor mental health. And actually using the doing, being, becoming and belonging theory help pull this together. And we as a group actually discussed that often as a disabled person, often you need to first belong before you can then develop within the environment to do the activities, and eventually you become part of that group. So it's so much more than the physical activity, and that you can get more from participation. Fiona, what else did you think we could draw from this theory?
Thank you, Tom. So there were two specific things that stood out for me from this theory that Bev presented. The fact that it met some of our individual requirements and helped to include disabled people within the environment and the activities that they were doing to become more confident. So meeting those individual requirements of the service users was really important for me. In addition to this, being supported in the right way for us to participate freely and properly within an activity, so enabling equity, not just equality.
We also spoke about how physical activity can be so much more, how it can help build resilience in everyday life. So for certain disabled people, that might lead to more things like independence within their disability, but also that it could be other aspects such as socialisation of being physically active and participating within these activities.
Thank you both. So to sum up, Bev, your theory actually helped to strengthen our ideas. And this included building our knowledge and understanding of these concepts, but also summing up and connecting up the dots for all the links that we actually found. Now, our second sub-question actually explored, what do funders want to know about disabled people's participation in sport and physical activities? So if I discuss that one, or if I start the discussion, what we noticed was there was a disconnect between the money and the people. So there was a bit of a lack of understanding around needs, but also the impact of funding. People reported that the current tools were inaccessible. That was the overriding thing that we discovered. They were also inappropriate and not sensitive enough to allow suitable responses. So this actually left disability sport and physical activity at a substantial disadvantage because there was more of a reliance on data and an impersonal nature to the questions. Some of the examples of this include questions that go around triggering topics such as loneliness and suicide, but also things like asking wheelchair users around sitting and standing during the day. So I will leave that one with you. There was also the issue around the actual format of questionnaires for feedback. Tom, how about you?
So from us, we speaking to funders, we do recognise that there is a drive towards change. A lot of what funders was telling us is they want to look at alternative ways of evaluating physical activity. But often they don't have the tools themselves available, and also there are limitations around that they need to capture data on what is being promised. So when they're funding activities, how they're measuring what's being promised. So although there is openness to change with how they capture this data, there are still some barriers within that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So our final sub-question looked at how can we give everyone the chance to share their experiences of disability, sport and physical activities in a way that funders can actually use. So in answer to these questions, we've actually come up with a series of recommendations from our discussions of the data. So the first one is disabled people cannot be standardized. Disabled people are individuals with individual needs and cannot be grouped together for measurement or statistical purposes. Standard and comparative approaches do not work. Disability sport cannot be grouped as a single category for data comparison, and any comparison needs to be far more subtle if it is possible at all. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Ness. Our second recommendation is to allow creative solutions to enable accessibility for all. So a number of people suggested that a toolkit of evaluation solutions would be useful because it would allow them to pick the best strategies that would work for their service users. For example, we could use and apply a range of formats to consider the individual needs at a specific site. Furthermore, gamification could be used. Suggestions were made that if the process of evaluation was more rewarding and fun, using gamification approaches, it may encourage more people to give their views freely. By making evaluation easier and user-friendly, it would enable more participants to have their voices heard and have greater opportunities to make change. In addition to this, another recommendation is the co-production with disabled people. Evaluation solutions should be developed for each project in partnership with the users and ensure that they are accessible, appropriate, and meaningful to disabled people. Essentially, disabled people should be rewarded for their contribution to this co-research.
Another recommendation we came across was capacity and capability. So we need to recognise the burden and the logistics of evaluation and the capacity of providers to conduct this evaluation. So physical activity deliverers aren't experts in evaluation, and we need to recognise this, but also understand what their skills are and what they do well. They have the capability to reach the participants and help capture what is really coming out of their activities. So we need to build this into any evidence or tools so it doesn't feel like a chore or have a negative impact on the sessions that they're actually delivering. Another recommendation was evaluation for learning rather than accountability. Evaluation should be used to make improvements to activities, to make them more available to disabled people and get more disabled people involved, helping to ensure their sustainability. It should also enable providers to prove they are doing a good job, when we know from our own experience this is often the case. The next recommendation we had was social belonging can be more important than fitness. So fitness outcomes are important for some disabled people, but often the social benefits of participation in sport and physical activities should not be underestimated as an outcome. And often the social aspects can actually help combat poor health, and giving a sense of belonging facilitates the ability to take part and continue participation.
Thanks, Tom. So another area we looked at was sustainability. So activities for disabled people need extra support to ensure sustainability. So it can actually take time to build numbers, and participant numbers may not be comparable with mainstream activities. So disabled people need reassurance that their activity that they're choosing to connect with and choosing to participate in will actually continue. So the last thing that we're going to talk about on here is actually one of my favourites, and that is valuing the contribution of disabled people. So when disabled people are involved in the development of evaluation tools and resources, disabled people should be rewarded for their contribution and experiential knowledge in line with other contractors. You wouldn't go to another contractor and assume that they're going to work for free simply because they have the knowledge and the experience that you need. But that seems to happen a lot in this environment. So one of our recommendations is that funding for co-production of evaluation should be factored into any funding application. So now that we have all of this information, what are we going to do with it? That's the question. So Bev, can you share the plans for our next steps?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nessa. So I'm going to write about the Voices for Inclusive Activity project for my PhD. But we've also talked about the possibility of writing a research article together. The need for evidence of this problem was highlighted in the data. Decision makers need evidence of a need for change. But this project is all about inclusive and accessible communication. So, Fiona, can you describe some of the other ways we'll share our recommendations?
Yes, certainly, that's fine. As well as sharing the recommendations on this podcast, we are hoping to collate them into a simple, accessible presentation and infographic for a range of organisations so that good practice can be shared. We hope that this will improve the outcomes for evaluation by involving disabled people throughout the entire process.
We're also going to be sharing these findings with key national and international organisations. These will include funders, disabled people, user-led organisations, and national governing bodies, all to influence action.
Thank you both. So what's key is that we're going to make our recommendations, but we need the decision makers to actually make the change. Our research provides clear evidence that this can and should happen, because disabled people need to be involved in creating the solution. And also, as mentioned earlier, being rewarded for their contribution in an appropriate way, including financially. So we are more than happy to continue this work in a collaborative approach with leading funders and organisations. We just need the people to get on board. So that is all for today. So thank you to my co-researchers and thank you all for listening. If you'd like to find out more about our next steps, please see the links below for our recordings on YouTube and our Podbean platform. So I will say goodbye for now.